Hey Reddit, this is my first post here, and I'm honestly not sure how to start. I've been lurking for a while, reading other people's stories, and now I guess it's my turn to vent. My marriage feels like it's falling apart, and I'm not sure what to do. This is about my wife, Jessica, and how I found myself sitting in our living room, questioning everything I thought I knew about her, and us. A little background, Jess and I have been married for 8 years. We met during our senior year of college at a mutual friend's party. She was the life of the room, cracking jokes, telling stories, and pulling everyone into her orbit. I was hooked almost immediately. She had this magnetic energy that made you feel like the most important person in the world when she was talking to you. We started dating a few weeks later, and it felt like we were inseparable after that. Our relationship had always been strong, or so I thought. Sure, we had our ups and downs, like any couple, but nothing that felt like a deal-breaker. We bought a house together a few years ago, adopted a dog, a golden retriever named Max, and built what I thought was a solid foundation. Jess worked as a marketing manager, and I ran a small IT consulting business from home. We were a good team. At least, I believed we were. But a few months ago, things started to feel off. At first, it was little things. Jess started coming home late from work more often. She said her company had picked up a few new clients, and her boss was piling on the pressure. I didn't think much of it, she's always been ambitious and willing to put in extra hours. But her late nights at the office started to become a regular thing, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. When I asked if she was okay, she'd wave it off, saying, "Just tired, babe. It's a lot, but I've got it under control." Then there was her phone. Jess had always been pretty casual about her phone usage, leaving it on the kitchen counter, letting me use it if I needed to look something up, that sort of thing. But recently, she'd become glued to it. I'd catch her grinning at messages, only to see her quickly lock the screen when I walked into the room. If I asked who she was talking to, she'd say it was her work group chat or her best friend, Sarah. "You know Sarah," she'd say, laughing like I was being silly for asking. And yeah, I do know Sarah, she's been Jess's best friend since high school, and I've always liked her. I had no reason not to trust what Jess was saying. But then the gym thing started. Jess has always been into fitness, but it went into overdrive seemingly overnight. Suddenly, she was waking up early for spin classes and squeezing in evening yoga sessions after work. She even bought a whole new set of workout gear, leggings, tank tops, expensive running shoes. When I joked that she was going to put me to shame, she just smiled and said she wanted to feel healthier. Again, nothing wrong with that, right? Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. It wasn't just the late nights, the phone, or the gym, it was her. Jess had always been affectionate. She'd hug me from behind while I made coffee, hold my hand while we watched TV, or sneak kisses when I least expected it. But that Jess seemed to be gone. Lately, she barely touched me. When I asked about it, she blamed stress. "I'm just so worn out from work," she'd say, rubbing her temples. "It's nothing to do with you." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. Still, a part of me started to wonder if I was overthinking things. I mean, we've been together for over a decade. Trust is the backbone of any marriage, right? So I tried to shake off the doubts. Jess was probably just going through a tough time, and I figured the best thing I could do was support her. Then came the first big red flag. About a month ago, Jess told me she was going to a networking event with her coworkers. She said it was mandatory and might run late. I didn't think twice about it. Jess has always been social, and networking is a big part of her job. That night, I made myself dinner, played some video games, and waited for her to come home. Around 11 p.m., I sent her a text asking if she was okay. She didn't reply. Midnight came and went, and I started to worry. Finally, around 1 a.m., she walked through the door. I asked her what happened, and she gave me this long-winded story about how the event ran late, then her coworkers convinced her to grab drinks afterward, and her phone died. "Sorry if I worried you," she said with a sheepish smile, kissing me on the cheek. Her explanation seemed plausible, but something about it felt rehearsed. Like she'd had time to come up with it. After that night, I started paying closer attention. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore the little inconsistencies that kept popping up. Like the time she told me she was meeting Sarah for lunch, but when I casually mentioned it to Sarah a week later, she seemed confused and said they hadn't seen each other in a while. When I confronted Jess about it, she laughed and said, "Oh, I must have mixed up the days. I meant I had lunch with some coworkers." Then there was the night she came home smelling like men's cologne. I asked her about it, and she claimed one of her coworkers had spilled his drink on her by accident. "It was so embarrassing," she said, rolling her eyes. Again, I didn't push too hard. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who's always suspicious. But deep down, the doubts were growing. Something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. I just didn't know how to figure out what was going on, or if I even wanted to. That's when everything started to unravel. I can't pinpoint the exact moment when my gut told me to stop trusting Jess, but I think it was the cologne incident that finally tipped me over the edge. I'd spent weeks brushing off her behavior, telling myself I was being paranoid. But after that night, every little thing she did seemed to set off alarm bells. It wasn't just her phone, the gym, or the late nights, it was the way she acted around me. She seemed distant, like she was physically there but emotionally checked out. I started to notice how much she avoided eye contact when we talked. Her smile seemed forced, like she was wearing a mask. I'd ask how her day was, and she'd give these vague answers, then quickly change the subject. It got to the point where I felt like I was living with a stranger. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. Instead, I started paying closer attention. I'm not proud of this, but I began watching her more carefully. When she got up early for the gym, I'd check the time she left and when she came back. When she said she was out with friends, I'd take note of how long she was gone. I even started glancing at her phone whenever she left it unattended, but she always seemed to keep it locked or face down. Then, one night, something happened that made me realize I wasn't crazy. It was a Friday, and Jess had told me she was going to a team dinner with her coworkers. "Don't wait up," she said, grabbing her coat and kissing me on the cheek before she left. I told her to have fun and settled in for a quiet night with Max. Around 10 p.m., I got up to grab a drink from the kitchen, and I noticed her iPad sitting on the counter. Jess rarely used the iPad anymore, it was an older model, and she usually stuck to her phone. But it was still logged into her iCloud account, which meant her messages synced across both devices. I'd never looked through her stuff before, but something about that night made me pause. I told myself I was just being paranoid, but my hands had a mind of their own. I opened the Messages app, and there it was, a whole thread of texts with someone named Alex. At first, I thought Alex might be a coworker. The messages didn't seem suspicious at first glance, just casual small talk about work and fitness. But the more I scrolled, the more intimate they became. "Can't wait to see you tonight," Alex had written earlier that day. "Same," Jess replied, followed by a winking emoji. My stomach dropped. I kept scrolling, my hands shaking as I pieced together their conversations. They'd been texting almost daily for months, sometimes late into the night. There were inside jokes, flirtatious comments, and plans to meet up. One message from Alex read, "Last night was amazing. You looked so good in that dress." Jess had replied, "You're too sweet. I couldn't stop thinking about you after I left." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I wanted to stop reading, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I found a message where Jess had lied about her whereabouts, told him I was out with Sarah again. He doesn't suspect a thing. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Jess, the woman I'd shared my life with for nearly a decade, was cheating on me. And not just once, it looked like this had been going on for months. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to call her, to demand answers right then and there. But I stopped myself. I needed to know more. I took screenshots of the messages and sent them to my own email, just in case. Then I put the iPad back exactly where I found it and tried to calm down. When Jess came home later that night, I pretended to be asleep. I heard her quietly moving around the bedroom, changing into her pajamas and climbing into bed beside me. She smelled like perfume, one I didn't recognize, and her hair was slightly damp, like she'd been in a rush to freshen up. My heart was pounding, but I stayed still, breathing evenly until I was sure she thought I was asleep. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the messages in my head, trying to figure out what I'd missed. How long had this been going on? Did she even feel guilty? Or was she just that good at lying? The next morning, I decided to dig deeper. I didn't want to jump to conclusions without knowing the full story. While Jess was at the gym, I checked her phone bill online. We share an account, so it wasn't hard to access. Sure enough, Alex's number showed up repeatedly, hundreds of texts and calls over the past few months. Some of them were at odd hours, like midnight or 6 a.m. I also noticed something else, charges on our joint credit card for hotels and expensive restaurants I didn't recognize. Jess had always handled most of our finances, so I hadn't paid much attention before. But now, every charge felt like a clue. There was one in particular that stood out, a payment to a boutique hotel downtown on a night she'd claimed to be working late. I felt sick. This wasn't just some harmless flirtation. Jess had been lying to me, over and over, and I'd been too blind to see it. By the time she came home from the gym, I was barely holding it together. She walked in with her usual cheerful, breezy attitude, like nothing was wrong. "Hey babe," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "How was your morning?" I forced a smile and said, "Fine." Inside, I was screaming. I knew I couldn't keep pretending for long. I needed to confront her. I just wasn't sure how, or if I was even ready to hear the truth. The weekend after I found the texts, I spent most of my time pretending everything was normal while my mind churned. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring down at the wreckage of my marriage, not sure if I was ready to jump into the chaos. But by Sunday night, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to confront Jess. I had to know the truth. I waited until after dinner. We were sitting on the couch, Jess scrolling on her phone while Max dozed at her feet. My heart was racing as I tried to figure out how to start. Finally, I just said it. "Jess," I began, keeping my voice as calm as I could, "we need to talk." She glanced up from her phone, looking slightly annoyed. "About what?" I took a deep breath. "I know about Alex." For a split second, her face froze. Then she laughed, an awkward, high-pitched laugh that I recognized as her buying time laugh. "What are you talking about?" she asked, setting her phone down. I locked eyes with her. "Don't play dumb, Jess. I saw the messages. On your iPad. I know you've been seeing him." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I thought she might come clean. But then her expression hardened, and she folded her arms. "You went through my stuff," she snapped. "That's a huge invasion of privacy, Mike. How could you?" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Don't turn this around on me. You've been lying to me for months, and you know it. Who is he? How long has this been going on?" Jess stood up, her arms still crossed defensively. "You're acting crazy," she said, her voice icy. "Alex is just a friend. We've been working on some projects together, that's all." "Don't lie to me," I said, standing to face her. "I saw the texts, Jess. I saw the one where you told him you couldn't stop thinking about him. The one where you said you told me you were with Sarah." Is that how you've been covering for this? Using her as an excuse? Her face turned red, and for a moment, I thought she might start crying. But instead, she snapped, "You're blowing this way out of proportion. Yes, Alex and I have been talking a lot, but it's not what you think. We're just close. You wouldn't understand because you've been so distant lately." That stopped me in my tracks. Distant? I repeated, incredulous. I've been distant. You're the one who's been pulling away, Jess. You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and now you're blaming me for it. Jess groaned and threw up her hands. God, Mike, this is why I didn't want to say anything. You always overreact. Alex is someone I can talk to, okay? He listens. He doesn't make me feel like I'm walking on eggshells all the time. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Walking on eggshells? I said, my voice rising. I've done nothing but try to support you, even when you started acting like a completely different person. And now you're telling me you turned to him because of me? Her jaw tightened. I didn't turn to him. We just clicked. It wasn't supposed to mean anything. Wasn't supposed to. I shot back. So it does mean something. Have you slept with him? That question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jess didn't answer right away. She avoided my gaze, staring at the floor like it might somehow save her. When she finally looked up, her eyes were cold. It doesn't matter, she said flatly. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me. It doesn't matter. I repeated, my voice cracking. Of course it matters, Jess. Did you cheat on me or not? She sighed heavily, like she was tired of the whole conversation. Fine. Yes. It happened. Once. But it was a mistake, Mike. A stupid mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Once? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You expect me to believe it only happened once? After everything I've seen, everything I know, you want me to take your word for it? Jess's eyes flashed with anger. I've told you the truth, okay? You're not exactly perfect, either, Mike. Maybe if you'd paid more attention to me instead of your stupid work or that damn dog, I wouldn't have felt so. Don't you dare blame Max, I snapped, cutting her off. And don't you dare blame me for your choices. You cheated, Jess. You betrayed me. I didn't make you do that. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the air between us thick with anger and resentment. Then Jess threw up her hands and stormed out of the room, muttering something about how she couldn't deal with this right now. I heard the bedroom door slam, and then everything went silent. I sank back onto the couch, my head in my hands. The anger I'd felt moments ago was quickly giving way to something worse, heartbreak. Jess had admitted it. She'd cheated on me. And instead of apologizing, she tried to justify it, tried to make it my fault. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the floor and trying to make sense of everything. The woman I'd loved for nearly a decade, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, had been lying to me for months. She'd betrayed me, not just with her actions but with the way she twisted the knife by blaming me for her mistakes. By the time I finally went to bed, Jess was already asleep, or pretending to be. I didn't bother trying to talk to her again. I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to talk to her the same way again. The days after Jess's admission were some of the worst of my life. I felt like I was walking around in a fog, my mind replaying her words over and over. It happened. Once. But it was a mistake. Even though she'd admitted to cheating, nothing about her explanation sat right with me. I couldn't stop wondering if she was still lying, if she was only telling me the bare minimum because I'd caught her red-handed. Jess didn't seem too interested in making things right. She spent most of her time either avoiding me entirely or acting like I was the one who'd done something wrong. Any time I tried to bring up what had happened, she'd either shut down or blow up. How many times do I have to say I'm sorry? She snapped at me one night after I asked her again about the timeline of the affair. You're never going to let this go, are you? I didn't answer because I didn't know the answer myself. Could I let it go? Could I forgive her? Every time I thought about her with Alex, her laughing at his jokes, touching him, maybe even kissing him, I felt sick. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She'd turned to him instead of me. She'd shared pieces of herself with him that were supposed to be mine. To make matters worse, Jess still refused to cut ties with Alex. It's not that simple, she said when I asked her to block his number. We work together. I can't just stop talking to him. I told her I didn't care. I told her that if she wanted any chance of fixing this marriage, she'd need to prioritize me over him. But every time I brought it up, she found an excuse. I'm not the only one who's messed up, she said during one particularly heated argument. Maybe if you'd been more present, I wouldn't have felt so neglected. Neglected. That word hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd spent years supporting Jess, cheering her on through every promotion, every tough project. I'd been the one who stayed up late cooking her dinner when she was working overtime, the one who listened to her vent about her coworkers. And now she was telling me it wasn't enough. That I was the reason she cheated. I wanted to fight back. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her how unfair she was being. But instead, I just shut down. The truth was, I was exhausted. My energy was completely drained, and I felt like I was living with a stranger. Jess wasn't the woman I thought she was. She wasn't the person I fell in love with. One night, I made the mistake of looking through the screenshots I'd taken of her messages with Alex. I don't know why I did it, maybe I was hoping to find something that would clarify things, some piece of evidence that would make it all make sense. But all it did was make things worse. The texts were so intimate, so casual, that it was clear their relationship had gone far beyond a one-time mistake. One message from Jess said, "I hate lying to him, but I can't stop thinking about you." Another said, "Maybe in another life, things could be different." I felt like I couldn't breathe. It was one thing to know she'd cheated, but seeing it in her own words made it real in a way I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. She'd built a whole separate relationship with Alex, one that I'd been completely blind to. That was the night I hit my breaking point. I sat in the living room with Max curled up beside me, and I realized I couldn't keep living like this. Jess and I couldn't go on pretending everything was okay. Something had to change. The next morning, I told her we needed to have a serious conversation. She rolled her eyes but sat down across from me at the kitchen table. "What now?" she asked, her tone exasperated. "I can't keep doing this," I said, my voice shaking. "I can't keep living in this limbo, Jess. I need to know if you're actually sorry, if you actually want to fix this, or if you're just staying because it's convenient." She looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "Of course I want to fix this," she said. "But you're not exactly making it easy, Mike. You keep bringing it up, over and over. How are we supposed to move forward if you won't let it go?" "Because I don't trust you," I said bluntly. "And I don't think you're being honest with me. I think there's more to this than you're telling me." Her face hardened. "What do you want me to say, Mike? Do you want me to spell out every single detail so you can torture yourself with it? Is that what's going to make you happy?" "No," I said, my voice rising. "What would make me happy is if you actually took responsibility for what you did. If you stopped blaming me or acting like I'm the bad guy here." Jess stood up abruptly, pushing her chair back with a screech. "I'm done talking about this," she said, grabbing her phone and heading toward the bedroom. "If you can't let it go, maybe we should just call it quits." I sat there, stunned, as her words sank in. Call it quits. Was that where we were headed? Was that what she wanted? For all her claims of wanting to fix things, it didn't feel like she was willing to put in the work. That night, I slept on the couch. I didn't even bother trying to talk to her again. The truth was, I didn't know if there was anything left to say. I felt like I'd been fighting for our marriage on my own, and I was starting to wonder if it was even worth it. That night on the couch, I stared at the ceiling for hours, my mind spinning. Max lay next to me, his head on my chest, sensing my distress in the way dogs always do. I kept running through everything Jess had said, and everything she hadn't. She'd admitted to the affair, but not without trying to shift the blame. She'd refused to cut off Alex and avoided any meaningful effort to rebuild my trust. I thought about what fixing things would even look like. Would I spend the rest of my life wondering if she was lying to me? Would I ever stop thinking about Alex every time she picked up her phone or walked out the door? It felt impossible. By the time the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. When Jess came into the kitchen that morning, I was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. She glanced at me, clearly wary, and I could tell she was expecting another fight. But I didn't have any fight left in me. "Jess," I said, my voice steady but firm, "I've made a decision. I can't do this anymore. I can't live in a marriage where there's no trust, no accountability. I've been trying to hold this together, but I can't be the only one putting in the effort." She froze, her face unreadable. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want a divorce," I said. The words felt heavy as they left my mouth, but also liberating. "This isn't working. You don't want to be here." "Not really. And I can't keep living in a relationship where I feel like I'm the only one who cares." For a moment, Jess didn't say anything. Then she scoffed. "Wow, Mike. You're just going to throw away 8 years like it's nothing." "I'm not throwing anything away," I said, trying to stay calm. "You did that when you decided to cheat. I'm just choosing to stop hurting myself by pretending this can work." Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms. "Fine. If that's what you want, I'm not going to stop you. But don't act like this is all on me. You've never been perfect either." I wanted to argue, to push back, but I didn't see the point. Jess had been deflecting and dodging responsibility for months, and I wasn't going to let her drag me into another pointless fight. "I don't need perfect," I said quietly. "I just needed honest. And you couldn't give me that." She stormed off, slamming the bedroom door behind her. I sat there, staring into my coffee, feeling an odd mix of sadness and relief. I didn't want my marriage to end, I never thought it would come to this. But at the same time, I felt like I could finally breathe. The next few weeks were a blur of logistics and emotions. Jess moved in with a friend while we figured out the divorce process. She didn't fight me on much, which made me think she'd already come to terms with it before I even brought it up. Maybe she'd been waiting for me to end it so she wouldn't have to. Telling my family and friends was hard. My mom cried when I told her, and my best friend, Greg, was furious on my behalf. "She's a piece of work," he said when I told him the whole story. "You're better off without her." I wasn't sure if I believed him at first. Part of me still felt like I'd failed, like I should have been able to fix things. But as time went on, I started to see things more clearly. Looking back now, months after the divorce was finalized, I can finally say I made the right choice. The first few weeks on my own were tough. The house felt empty, and the quiet was unbearable. But I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into work, started taking Max on longer walks, and even picked up a new hobby, cycling. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd lost in trying to keep Jess happy until I started to find myself again. As for Jess, I haven't heard much from her. A mutual friend told me she's still working at the same company, and Alex is no longer in the picture. Apparently, their connection fizzled out pretty quickly once the secrecy was gone. Part of me felt vindicated when I heard that, but mostly, I just felt sad for both of us. She'd thrown away something real for something fleeting, and in the end, neither of us came out unscathed. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that trust is the foundation of any relationship. Without it, everything else falls apart. And trust isn't just about being faithful, it's about being honest, even when it's hard. Jess couldn't give me that, and I couldn't keep pretending it didn't matter. For anyone reading this who's been through something similar, here's my advice: don't ignore your gut. If something feels wrong, don't let yourself be gaslit into thinking you're crazy. And if someone breaks your trust, don't let them convince you it's your fault. You deserve a partner who values you enough to be honest, even when it's messy or uncomfortable. I'm still healing, but I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. And while I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone, I know it's made me stronger. One day, I hope I'll find someone who will love me the way I deserve to be loved. Until then, it's just me and Max against the world, and honestly, that's enough for now.